Welcome to the Cove Podcast, your stop for PME on the go.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Cove Podcast. I'm Captain Todd Lemper, your regular host. On today's episode, we're going to talk about, it's off the back of sort of the Deputy Chief of Army or Major General Chris Smith's Warrior Culture episode. I had a few requests in the comments, particularly on YouTube, about having a senior soldier talk about what is required of soldiers in 2025 and beyond, or what the organisation actually demands. My guest today is Warrant Officer Class 1 Scott Krum, who is the Regimental Sergeant Major of the Infantry Corps, Royal Australian Infantry. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, sir. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely awesome. So I think today we have the mammoth task. We have the mammoth task of defining what we require of soldiers in the Australian Army and in your corps going forward. We're going to do that, but using the Afghan NEO, which you deployed on, as the sort of case study to explore sort of some difficult tasks that can be asked of you at a strategic level, infilling into a nation that you may not have seen before at short notice. I suppose I'll just introduce the case study first before we go into your experiences. But the Afghanistan Non-Combatant Evacuation Operation was run from 14th to 30th of August 2021. It was US-led and coalition-supported NEO. It was launched from Afghanistan in Kabul. During the 17-day NEO, US and coalition aircraft, us being the coalition, combined to evacuate approximately 124,000 civilians, on average 7,500 people per day, which were enabled by 5,000 US military service members who secured and operated the Hamid Karzai International Airport, including six different airport entry points in Kabul. Australia's military air evacuation in Afghanistan was one of the largest humanitarian airlift operations in our history. Australia evacuated around 4,200 or over 4,200 people on 32 flights from Kabul. That, I suppose, what we achieved at short notice, and we're just about to talk about short notice, readiness, preparedness, resilience, and working really hard for a short but really a surge, right? I suppose if we come back to, you're at 1RAR at the time, you're the Regimental Sergeant Major of 1RAR, and you, when did you hand over the Ready Battle Group and take that role?
So it was about mid-2021. We'd settled in, done our lead-up training, and then basically went straight on a warfighter activity, C2C-led. And I think that's the best grounding training that we could have done leading into the RBG. And then it was business as usual. And then we'd just finished an exercise. We had got back. We'd done some live firing, built on our skills, and then a bit of a lull. And we'd done some PME that afternoon, Friday afternoon, and then we get the phone call.
Yeah, so I suppose, like, if we come back to, we're going to launch into that later in the episode, but with in terms of the standard war fighting and high tempo combat operations, if we come back to that, were you at all prepared, or did any of your scenarios or stick lanes or any serials on the warfighter touch on deploying to the capital of Afghanistan and ripping 4,200 people out of the country?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
But in hindsight, it didn't need to be.
Yeah.
Once you become competent at that high-end warfighting, intensity, fatigue, resilience, doing basically stability operations, HADR, tasks like that, you just do it.
Yeah. And I think we'll come back to that, absolutely. So you've gone through a standard warfighter and you hand over in the middle of the year. That's probably deliberate so that you can get some runs on the board coming back from Christmas leave and stuff. The training year, the idea of a training year going from January to December is little bit of a fallacy. We continue to train and we shouldn't start again. But you go through reps and sets as a warfighter, take over the Ready Battle Group, and anticipating most regiments would take, or battalions would take over the Ready Battle Group, and nothing would happen for their duration. Was there an anticipation that something would happen? Were anyone tracking the news beforehand and sort of thinking that Australia would go? Or was it business as usual, like you said before, and no one was really anticipating much?
Yeah, it was business as usual. I think if we knew that going back into Afghanistan was going to occur, I think we would have done things slightly different. People would have been far more ready to deploy with vaccinations, etc. And even when it occurred on the Friday afternoon, I thought, we're going to get called for a COVID assist task or an HADR task. And remember at the time, the Taliban had made inroads, but people were talking 6 to 12 months before they would push all the way through to essentially Kabul. Now, it turned out to be less than a month.
Yeah, no one could really anticipate how rapid that would be. So you talked about all bad news happens on a Friday. Whether this is good or bad is sort of subjective, but everything always happens on a Friday, right? So you get through PT on a Friday morning, and then you roll through a normal day. Where are you when you get the call? It'll be way better if you're at home, like in stubbies and thongs, but I imagine you're on base. Like, what happened when you got the call?
Yeah, we're actually at the Oasis across the road from 3 Brigade doing PME because we've wrapped up another exercise.
Yeah.
So a bit of feedback, bit of low tempo, I suppose, before we get back into it again. And then from there, Friday afternoon, all the headquarters is back. People have been warned out. And then the headquarters deploys on the Sunday. And we fly to Brisbane to AMAB, and then within 5 days in country at HKIA.
Yeah, so 5 days from first phone call to the RSM and CO to being in theatre to landing in Kabul. So what sort of were you well prepared? Were they like, we know exactly where you're going to fly from, you're going to move straight into Al Minhad Air Base and stage there for a brief period before flying straight to Afghanistan? You've done the flight before, I imagine, having deployed there multiple times. Sort of what was did you fly green means over to, or Strat Air, over to Al Minhad Air Base and then into Kabul? And what was the sort of transit like? And that sort of build up with, what did you do straight away to sort of prepare the force?
Like I said, I think...
I just hit you with 4 questions all in one.
That's right. In hindsight, there was things that really did go wrong before we even got out of 3 Brigade. We formed up, and so straight away the news was already out. It was in the Townsville Bulletin the next day. OPSEC sort of gone. There were issues with getting kitted out. Our body armour and live plates, everything is boxed. It's not there, ready to go, as you would assume. You can't crack the connexes and go through all these things prior. And so I think that was a huge lesson learnt. And then once we get into AMAB, we had to rejig plates, body armour. So, and you can imagine too, AMAB is actually withdrawing. So they're planning to pull out within 6 to 12 months. So there's not that force in place to do all your logistics nodes, etc., etc. So that wasn't ideal, but we did overcome, and we got in the country. And then once boots are on the ground, then we get straight onto our task.
So as you're flying, so kitting happens in a combination of in Townsville at 3 Brigade and then at AMAB on the fly. We get into, or you start to fly over a country that you've flown into many a times before. And could you see out the windows and look out, and was it nostalgic to be, because I assume the last time you left was MTF 2. Did you assume that you probably weren't coming back in any capacity? And then subsequently, like, could you see out on the ground and see Uruzgan or Kandahar or any of those components as you flew over, being like, this is a country I've been to before you flew into Kabul?
Yeah, it is a little bit surreal. I've been pretty fortunate in my career. I deployed with MRTF 1 in 2009-10 and back again sort of 10-11 for MTF 2.
Yeah.
And it is a bit surreal flying back, seeing the mountains and then landing in HKIA. I hadn't landed there before. I normally flew straight into TK for most of my operations and haven't done a lot in Kabul. So it was the first time in HKIA, and that was pretty much the same for all the troops. No one had really been based there or done anything at HKIA. So the Americans did a super job, getting a security perimeter rebuilt after, and everyone's seen the footage of the locals going straight through the airport, jumping on the planes, and then falling out of the sky, essentially. And that's sort of like the last thing we saw as we're flying to AMAB, ready to go into country. And so it was a bit, what is the security going to be like once we landed? But as I said, the US forces did a super job to actually rebuild that perimeter.
So the soldiers are seeing footage of Afghanis that are absolutely, I suppose, terrified and sort of trying to get out of their country by clinging on to the landing gear of aircraft as it tries to take off. I mean, it was all over popular news media. We were all tracking it, but to be going in and seeing that footage, was there nerves, anxiety, anticipation, excitement about being able to help? Like, what was the vibe at AMAB and on the aircraft as you flew in?
Yeah, I think it is more excitement more than anything, which sounds a little bit strange, but it's not nerves or anything like that. You know, everyone's trained to do a task, and then once you get there and you actually start doing that task, you know, things just seem to flow. Just that natural leadership from you know, Colonel Holmes all the way down to the junior NCOs was exceptional.
Yeah, and everyone's I'm not sure whether when you took over the Ready Battle Group, whether a switch flicked and you find this purpose and it drives an entire team to move forward, but it definitely would have been sort of at the centre and forefront during the preparations for the NEO, and when you got the task, people sort of really hone in on what they're doing. Yeah.
No, 100%. You know, as I said, like lessons learned, you know, it was during the COVID, you know, the pandemic where everyone had to be vaccinated. You know, for right or wrong, Defence decided that, you know, it wasn't an order, but you needed to get them. And maybe, you know, in hindsight, a lot of soldiers would have gone and got their double vaccinations. So when the call out came and we started doing all our, you know, battle prep, you know, we had to leave, you know, 100 soldiers behind that potentially would have been on that deployment just due to a simple vaccination.
Yeah, I could only imagine looking at the aircraft as it flies off being one of the 100 that is not going with the rest of your unit, just because of a personal choice or like the fact that you weren't ready in one way, shape or form. It wasn't always on the individual's responsibility for not being ready, but more broadly being one of those 100 and being like all I want to do is go with everyone right now for this huge task, you know what I mean? Yeah.
No, 100%.
Yeah. So before we get off, what aircraft did you fly into HK on? KC-30?
KC-30, yep.
So before you get out the side door and onto the tarmac for the first time, I want to come back to that preparation. A common theme on many of the episodes, talk to Colonel Papalitsis on Timor and Major Warnock on also Timor, infilling with SASR. Yep. Not a lot of time beforehand. Yours is the same. It rhymes. You did not have any preparation time. I suppose if you contrast this operation as opposed to the Interfet, Afghanistan, all the ones that you've been on before, was the notice different and the sort of infill different, or was it reminiscent of all the times you'd been at short notice and having to tell your family, I'm going and I don't know when I'll come back? Yeah,
it's a little bit similar. Being the RBG, I was lucky in my family. We, when I say we, I was in Delta Company in 5RR as a CSM, and we took over the RBG, RCT responsibilities for the first time in a long time that had left 3 Brigade. So my family was sort of inculcated in once you're in that RBG, anything can happen. And we'd done call-outs, and I know everyone here has done a call-out, and it's like, it's just, you know, rinse and repeat, and we check our gear and so on, so on, so on. But I think it was, you know, great to actually use the RBG for what it was designed for. You know, it hadn't been called out since 2006 for East Timor. So, you know, it set the standard that the RBG is there for a reason. We were called out multiple times on my tenure at 1RR, and then after that it's been called out again for Lebanon and some other evacuation tasks. So I think that's a good thing. Definitely. And, you know, on the plane over, like, we really used our time. It wasn't just to get your head down and relax and get sorted. It was, you know, networking. So we're on there with the wing commanders, you know, the Sec 4, you know, people that we'd never met before.
RAF security forces,
People we'd never met before. And Colonel Holmes, he set to tasking people straight away. Like, tasked me with what? As soon as we get there, and I was there with the CSM, Ross Peck, and it's like, as soon as we get there, what do we need to do? It's like, you know, our body armour, need to sort that out. You know, need to group in 0, rations, battle prep, everything that was required, because we knew it was going to be a short turnaround. And that's what we got after.
So you get in the back of the aircraft and everyone's preparing. You can probably see the glow of people's sort of devices as they're trying to read certain things and trying to get like up to speed with the situation. A lot of be prepared to tasks, I imagine, when you get onto the ground. It's still like you're trying to predict exactly what you're going to do without having sort of been there yet. Was that sort of the vibe? It's like a lot of be prepared to. You need to,
Yeah, 100%. We knew we'd had to, you know, evacuate people, but how do we get them from outside the gates to the airport, North Gate and Abbey Gate, when, you know, there's thousands and thousands of people. You know, some people have passports, some people don't. The Taliban are providing, you know, security or a presence on the outside of the gate, and then you have coalition forces on the inside of the barriers. So, I mean, there's a lot to think about and a lot of be prepared to tasks. And then once you get in that rhythm, I think the first few days we probably only evacuated no more than 70 people, and then once we we got the hang of it and knew what we were doing, it was like hundreds and hundreds, and at some times we couldn't even evacuate them. We had just so many people that we had to try and push out, but the planes just couldn't turn around in enough time, and so we had to hold them as best we could.
So when you come off the KC-30 down the ramp and onto the tarmac for the first time in Kabul, what did you see? I suppose you just talked about a coalition in a cordon, for lack of a better term, and then Taliban on the outside of the on the perimeter. What did you see for the first time? And then how you talked about preparing and thinking about likely tasks and stuff. Like, what was your first task? Where were you taking someone? And also, what was it like when you got on the ground?
First task was we need to find some real estate. Every coalition nation that was there before us had grabbed real estate. There was no rhyme or reason. It's like, if that's an empty building, that's yours. If that's the car with the key in it, that's yours. So we had to do the best we could to find some real estate. We were helped massively by the SOPT, SOCOM guys that were there, the planning team before us. Quick handover with them. And then the first task was to take the junior NCOs up to the North Gate for a recce, and then to put them on task. So I can talk about that quickly. So we're escorted up to the North Gate, and then even en route, and none of the junior NCOs had been to Afghanistan before, and so en route, there's people that have been shot, so bullet wounds, German RAP, just a makeshift RAP. They're doing first aid on these members, and so that's the first sort of telltale sign that it's going to be quite serious, quite dangerous, and we need to be really switched on.
As you're leading these junior NCOs through, and they're saying these sort of things, and you're looking back, are they wide-eyed? What was the sort of how are they taking it in? I suppose, are they still set on the task, and you could see they were driven to follow you and get into the likely task, or was it like the fact that they were like, this is wild and chaotic?
Bit of everything, really. It is wild. It was chaotic, especially when we got to the gate. But walking through there, I think that was just the reality check that everyone needed. This isn't going to be just a simple task. It's going to need some great leadership from the junior NCOs, which we had in spades. And then when we got to the North Gate, chaos. So there's thousands and thousands of people lined up outside. You got the Taliban on the outside firing warning shots in the air, into the dirt, ricocheting and hitting people. And that's where these people are getting dragged in for first aid. The Americans, they did a super job, but they were frustrated and under the pump, like smallish force trying to negotiate thousands and thousands of people. And all I can sort of relate it to is you see scenes in the UK football when they have these massive stampedes. That's what it's like. You've got thousands and thousands of desperate people trying to basically get through a turnstile. That is it. So you have American soldiers out the front, and they were firing rubber bullets from shotguns at point blank range into people. And so they require first aid. Without notice, CS gases being thrown to sort of quell small-ish riots. And then to add to the chaos, the Taliban are on the outside firing warning shots. So that's the scenes at North Gate to begin our task, let alone, we weren't the primacy at that gate. So we had to rely on the Americans and to try and find Australian personnel that we needed to evacuate, extremely tough. So we basically did a battle handover with the corporals. From there, they came back, grabbed their sections, started the rotation, and within a few hours, they were starting to get people and starting to bring them through.
Yeah. Very evident at this point, you probably won't get any sleep for a few days, right? How, like this, in terms of a surge, you're thinking this is a mammoth task, and you just talked about how many people you processed in the first bit when you were trying to get sort of like set up and established. I imagine it's like the movies where there's a table in this random building, you just push all the shit off it and put a map down and like start nailing out, like the CO starts nailing out a plan. Was it just So just talk about your force. So you had junior NCOs, you had them. Was it just a platoon and then the battalion headquarters? Is that like for the first infill?
Yeah, 2 platoons, headquarters, and then we surged and brought the 3rd platoon forward as well.
So that's, I suppose, the scenes as you give the junior NCOs over sort of that battle handover, and then they come back and get their sections, start rotating through, and we get some sort of autonomy knowing full well that we're going to surge. You go back to the RHQ. Now, what is the task ahead of setting up? And noting you talked about not having prepared for this during a warfighter, what is the tasks ahead in terms of, are you getting out the PAM and looking at NEO, or is like what are the steps ahead for the RHQ?
Yeah, it's funny. To be brutally honest, no, we didn't go through the PAM. We just utilised our skills, knowledge, and like I said, like the warfighter set us up for huge success, and CTC did a fantastic job to set up those exercises the way they did. But we didn't go through it like that because when you actually go through the PAM, I'd done it when we took over the Ready Combat team in 5RR. It's set up for deliberate tasks. The amount of stores you have is huge. It's based on deploying on a ship. We had nothing.
And very not deliberate, like as in you were,
100%. So we did a lot of the initial start is liaison. So liaison with Americans.
You're trying to work out who you can sort of rely on for different tasks and trying to get out and spread yourself thin to get as many people in your network as you can and work out where they fit. Is that
safe? Yeah, 100%. We liaised with the British unit that was in H Kaya, so 2 para. The Americans, they had their headquarters set up, so we'd go in for a few briefings. The OPSO was like integral there. He went to a lot of those meetings and discussions, and then it was really just getting out, getting a vehicle, going out and doing some recce's of the other gates. And that's when we came to Abbey Gate, and they were the 2 real areas that we focused on, North Gate and Abbey Gate. And then within 48 hours, North Gate was untenable, and so it was just locked down. And then that created... I guess confusion and some friction that now you only have one gate for everyone to get into. And so once we got to Abbey Gate, again, we're talking tens of thousands of people trying to get through about 5 turnstiles.
So you talked about Northgate being untenable. What do you mean by that? It was just that what didn't have the...
Yeah, just the security couldn't keep up with the amount of people. The Taliban increased violence. The people couldn't stay there for long periods of time as in the local nationals like they needed to for days, but it's 40 degrees. There's no food, there's no water unless they've brought it forward. There's barbed wire to keep them out. And so it was decided by the US to close that gate.
And so you switched to Abbey Gate. When you start to get in the flow of processing and determining who gets on a flight and whatnot, I mean, DFAT was also, there's a lot of government organisations that also work together as a strategic task. So you have a number of different government organisations. When you start to get in the flow of this processing, what does that sort of look like? How does it work? Through Abbey Gate or Northgate before it was closed and in? Like, what does the processing look like?
Yeah, it's tough. So DFAT briefed us, and so priority 1 was anyone with an Australian passport. So if you have an Australian passport, that's a bit of a no-brainer, straight through. But it's not as easy as just, hey, come straight through. They could be back, 5 rows deep, trying to push through other people, trying to push through other coalition forces and security to get to us, to then bring them forward. Because it was so dangerous. It may have just been the father with the Australian passport. And he's come forward and said, yes, I still have my family. Then he has to go back and get his family. So this can take a couple of hours to just get a family through the security process to even get them to DFAT. And then from there was letters that they'd applied for through DFAT. And there were just letters from local nationals that had worked with Australian coalition forces over the 20 years we're in Afghanistan. And, I guess they thought that because they'd worked for us,
interpreters, it was,
100%. It was a free pass, which unfortunately, not so much.
So they get through these families. So obviously the priority is Australian passports. They get through and seemingly not as easy as you think, but like quite clear. That was binary. They have an Australian passport and it's good to go. You start to get to the secondary sort of push. how are they determined? I suppose you don't get to make the decision on whether they go back or not, but like sort of what happens when they get into the processing area and either they get through, which is obviously an easy story. They're talking about getting on an aircraft and moving back using the RAAF. But if they don't get through, what happens?
Yeah, it's unfortunate. We bring people through that, approved visa holders, but, that was tainted some of the documentation, etc. And it may be just for that one person, but they're trying to bring their cousins, family members. So one person may come through with 12 people, but with no documentation. And so at the end of the day, the decision's made that we can't evacuate them. And so unfortunately, we need to push them back out through the side gate, back out into the crowd, and that essentially is it.
And the Taliban is on the outside of the gates. Obviously, the situation is incredibly volatile, but these, I imagine, section commanders or section members are walking families back to the gate to push them back into broader Afghanistan, knowing full well that they won't get on an evacuation operation to get home.
Yeah.
How difficult do you think that was for the section members and secos as they're sort of shifting task and being asked to do things that are incredibly difficult, like ethically, or whether they agreed with it or not is largely irrelevant. But sort of how difficult were those sort of pushes back to the gate?
Yeah, massively difficult. But the professionalism of the junior NCOs, everyone involved really, but and the soldiers, I can't speak highly enough of them. They went and did their tasks to the best of their ability, and even coming back after that and speaking to people, it was a positive experience. At the end of the day, 4,200 people we evacuated and potentially saved. I don't think you can dwell on the ones, twos, and tens, to be honest.
So I suppose that's that 4,200 evacuations and evacuees moving back. You fast forward, becomes, I imagine it was incredibly difficult work and with little sleep and sort of surge operations. When it's constant, it's not really surge, is it? But you surge for the entire duration. Some tough decisions to make and difficult sort of conditions, but some incredible professionalism like you talked about before. And that understanding of the broader intent and picture sort of paid dividends, I think, in that sense. So how did you know sort of that short period was up and you were coming back to Australia? Like, how did you get notified of that?
Yeah. So, combination of orders. The Taliban had given the US a deadline that they had to be out of the country, and that was a non-negotiable. So then we started to move out in dribs and drabs. Now, unfortunately, or fortunately for the Australian forces, we pulled out about 24 hours prior before the Brits and the US, only because, excuse me, huge forces. We only had a bit over 100. So you can't really do that much when you're talking about all these gates and security posture, etc. So we redeployed, and then basically the next day when we arrived in AMAB, that's when we got the news of the IED that had gone off at Abbey Gate and killed the 13 US forces and 100 local nationals. But we had been there literally a few hours prior. But yeah, unfortunately they dealt a heavy blow, the US, but there's no way we could have postured our forces to provide the security with just a small number that we had. And so it was a deliberate decision to pull out when we did, and it was just a gradual movement of coalition forces, Australia, the Brits, and then finally the US. So
a little bit more deliberate than your infill in terms of able to issue orders, know what your task is. I was going to ask if you flew straight back to Townsville, but you said you went back to Al Minhad Air Base.
Yeah.
Was there any subsequent taskings at AMAB?
Yeah.
Yeah. So so you land back there to still a skeleton force there, I imagine.
Yep.
And then you find out about an IED at the gate that you could have, days earlier you would have been at the gate, or your soldiers would have been at the gate. Get to AMAB, what were the subsequent taskings before you think it's sort of all done-ish and moving back to Australia? What sort of were you tasked at AMAB to do?
Yeah, so we still had security tasks. So we had brought all those evacuees back, but they hadn't been processed from AMAB back to Australia. So the RAF had set up an emergency handling centre, and they were providing security, processing, et cetera, and so we just did a bit of the the lifting, and there was like 3 sort of compounds where we had all the families, et cetera, and so we just provided security, companionship. Some of the guys were kicking the soccer ball with them, making them feel a bit more normal, and then once they'd been processed, and they were just waiting on flights. And so during that time, we'd feed them, like I said, provide that sort of security, and then put them on the planes and then send them to Australia.
Yeah, back to Australia. And then subsequently you get on the plane and fly back. How long were you at AMAB for on the redeployment?
I think we were there about 10 days.
10 days, yeah.
Yeah.
So another 10 days and then you start to proceed home back to Townsville.
Yeah.
So operation incredibly, realistically quite short in comparison to the deployments you've been on before, quite short but very intense, I imagine, and sort of constant work and sort of unknowns, a lot of unknowns. If we bring that back to what's expected of, I suppose, soldiers in your corps, and I say soldiers are Royal soldiers, I mean officers and soldiers inside the Infantry Corps now. If we come back to that, I suppose the first component of what is the future demands of riflemen and soldiers and officers is that readiness component. You've hinted at that a number of times through the case study. Like being ready, what does that sort of encompass? And it's not just like, IR currency, individual readiness. We're talking about preparing families. You talked about your family knowing about the ready battle group and what that means, having deployed a couple of times before. But what does readiness mean from a larger sense? And what is a soldier who is ready?
Well, it's a full suite of everything there. Their skills, their attitude, their professionalism, having all their equipment ready to go at a moment's notice. They've done all the training, the lead-up work, and they've retained all that information. And then it flows into the governance, the admin side of things, like we talk about vaccinations, official passports, so on. And then really, it's just maintaining the rage in case we do get that call up. And so it is business as usual, but business as usual in a battalion is a full-time, full-on job.
Yeah, and making sure all that's ticked. I did an episode with Lieutenant Colonel Gordon Wing, who's a doctor on sort of field hygiene, but I took issue with that component because we're talking about hygiene anywhere, you know what I mean? Yeah. Not just in the training areas. We're talking about on operations and in the potential operating environment. He talked about doxycycline and dipping cams and sort of being prepared in that sense, but having two ICs actually check that everyone's doing the right thing and sort of constantly going through and checking constantly. Do you think we have a good culture of sort of those junior NCOs holding their section to account with checking constantly? And how did you reinforce that in one hour, for example?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. It had recycled back through to 3 Brigade, the RBG, and I guess everything old is new again, and it's call-outs, it's doing kit equipment. We're quite lucky to have the aviation regiment in Townsville, and so we did short notice tasks. Chinooks would land on the parade ground, the platoons would measure up in their chalks with all their kit on-off. Now, they wouldn't always fly, but a lot of the times we did fly and a lot of times we did tasks as well. So to have that reinforced constantly just shows you that we are ready and good to go. And we set up just outside BHQ near the parade ground, so it's great to see the junior NCOs, Lance Corporals, everyone getting after it, making sure that their sections are 100% deployable. And
checking. So when as you rise up the ranks, and you sort of get the next rung, talked about, I suppose I'll ask this question as which rank was the most difficult to sort of promote to, but also like becoming sort of part of the junior NCO sort of cohort rather than one of the section members, and sort of then turning around to your section and being like, no, I actually need to check this thing and you need to do it. Do you know what I mean? How hard is that? Do you know what I mean? For the first time and taking on that role of like, no, do exactly as I'm sort of telling you to do because it's for a broader intent, which is that you're in the right chalk and you can AMO into something if we need to do that straight away.
Yeah, it's extremely difficult. I've been massively fortunate to deploy in every rank except for private.
Yeah.
And every time you go back to the battalion, every time you get promoted, there's more pressure put on you. The workload becomes greater, And to be brutally honest, I was nervous going back, even though I'd served for nearly 30 years, going to 1RA as the RSM.
Yeah, you talked about that expectation thing. There is so much more. What about, so there's a tendency for your corps in specifically, but a number of corps to stay in the same regiment for as long as you can, right? And you try and bed in Townsville or Brisbane or Darwin, wherever you want to go. You grew up in 5-7, I think. So that Darwin sort of bed in, and everyone who goes there absolutely love it. I'm a massive fan of Darwin. But like if you... sort of you're trying to bed into this one regiment and then you're staring down the barrel of the organisation expecting more of you and subsequently you sort of promoting, what's the sort of core take on sort of people staying in the same regiment and being promoted, or is it better or refreshing to move to a different regiment?
Yeah, it's definitely refreshing. I've been, like I said, fortunate. I grew up in 5-7. I was a mech guy, mech instructor. I'd been to the School of Armour and then sort of gone full circle to, School of Infantry Battle School in the UK. But I guess, my biggest tip is for those going to the next rank level is to, at the start, just play to your strengths. So whatever your strength is, get after that first, and then you can start to work on the little bits and pieces that you need to work on. For me, going to 1RA, my mech, I was a PMV instructor, and it was a PMV enabled battalion. So I went back to what my strengths were in 5-7, looking after vehicles, vehicle husbandry, getting people in the compound, getting familiar with their kit and equipment. So we introduced that quickly. The CO and myself, I crewed my own vehicle throughout the 2 years there. And then you get a feel for the battalion. And then once you get a feel for it, it's just, I guess business as usual. And it was really rewarding going to 1RA, and it's probably one of the best postings of my career.
So I want to talk about the vehicle husbandry component because I had Brigadier James Davis on, who's the CEO of 2CAV now, Director General Future Land Warfare, but he talked about sort of making it so that when he was CEO, nothing left the regiment without it being fully tooled up. That being comms and weapons, like it did not leave the compound unless it was fully tooled up. That's sort of tanks and ASLAVs. If we come full circle, you talked about pre-episode about Interfet and deploying with what you had and knowing full well that you didn't have an RPS, repair parts store, you didn't have sort of consumables to be able to sort of get these things up to scratch once you get into country. How important is it? And then you talked about live plates with SCE deploying into the NEO. How important is it for the equipment stuff? Some people are super into it and they love having everything absolutely squared away and good to go on their soldier combat ensemble. How important is vehicle husbandry, knowing we can be called out at any minute, but also our own personal kit?
Yeah, hugely important. I think the biggest takeaway, especially 5-7 and deploying on Interfet, we took the battalion's worth of M113A1s. So these are Vietnam era vehicles that we mended, we bandaged up, and we got every single vehicle, like about 120 vehicles, to East Timor, and they were a super vehicle for that task. Our AO was probably 10 times the size of any other unit there because we could just branch out and provide that presence. And so it was definitely a combat multiplier. But there was no get vehicles from another unit, rely on other people to do the job for us. Every Thursday we would manage those vehicles. We'd service them, we'd train on them. We'd make sure they were ready to go, and we'd do monthly servicing. It was really hands-on, and then that paid off once we deployed with, like I said, 120 Vietnam-era vehicles. Yeah, and they did the job. Yeah,
and the job for a period where they had no support basically and were isolated in terms of repair parts and maintenance and consumables and stuff.
Yeah, 100%.
So I suppose we've talked about readiness more broadly with families in the Ready Battle Group. We've talked about being prepared for whatever the ADF might ask of you or the Army might ask of you. And then we talked about vehicle husbandry. If we come back to the logical step, which is a sort of the purpose, we've fought counterinsurgency operations for decades and have done a number of HADR tasks and then a lot of domestic operations, COVID assist, bushfire assist and stuff. And now with the release of the National Defence Strategy, we sort of get it more refined and sort of specific potential operating environment and threat as well. Sort of, I suppose if we come back, what is the purpose of a rifleman or a soldier in 2025 and beyond now that we've shifted focus? And do you think that's more refined now, less refined, and sort of what are we getting after?
Yeah, no, 100%. So, and they need to be, 100% a warfighter. Conventional operations, off-ops, defensive operations, being able to deploy as a platoon, more than likely, be able to regroup as a combat team for some decisive events. But the high-end warfighting, similar to Russia, Ukraine, and the Gaza Strip, that kind of warfighting in urban, jungle, littoral, that's what we need, every soldier, to be able to feel comfortable fighting in those environments.
You have been quoted as saying if you do the high-end war fighting, the rest is easy, right? You talked about the NEO being one of those examples. Sort of, can you explain what you mean by that in terms of, you talked about offensive operations, defensive operations, but what, like, if you're good at high-end war fighting, what does that mean for an institution?
Yeah. So essentially you can deploy your battle group to, a near-peer enemy and not just survive but thrive, which is the key. So like I said, our soldiers here, especially at the School of Infantry where I've been the RSM, they're the most capable and qualified soldiers we've ever had. TCCC, they do a full comm suite, they do urban live firing, off-ops, def-ops, HE, you name it, more qualified than anyone. It's about sustaining all those skills over long periods of time.
Yeah. And I suppose, like, to go directly contrast decades ago where you go through Kapuka and the first aid was like, where's the snake? Like, gloves on, where's the snake? And then subsequently, LF6, you're on your guts, like, firing. And then obviously you take different positions, but you're basically sitting in the open effectively, to then fast forward to combat shooting where you can fail for combat behaviours or not showing combat behaviours. TCCC, where you're actually in the tactical and there's sticks lanes and people trying to you're refining that threat in the high-end warfighting. That must be refreshing to look out over the School of Infantry and look at the training. Live fire urban, that is absolutely awesome. Like, so is it refreshing to look over and just be like, the skills that we're getting now are absolutely phenomenal and they're right on the money with where we need soldiers to be?
Yeah, 100%. Our combat behaviours have just escalated exponentially. It's not that we didn't know what to do decades ago. We've fought in trenches and training in Singapore and the like, but to actually have it as packages, consolidated TTPs and SOPs, so each soldier is doing the same format, same sort of drills. I think we've come a long way, and I'm pretty comfortable that definitely in the urban environment, our skills and drills are exceptional. Communicate, medicate, all those sort of things we're experts at. And now it's just getting comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yep.
In the jungle for long periods of time, in the littoral, manoeuvring, rapidly reorganising to achieve those decisive events when the time comes.
If we go back to 1RAR and talk about sort of building competition but also performance inside the unit, so sort of coming out with all these skills, you go into as the RSM of 1RAR again, and you sort of, where is your focus on rank-wise as the RSM? Where are you sort of targeting to sort of develop and build that performance? And subsequently, how are you building competition within the unit to try to, like, is it a good thing that they compete against one another? And then across battalions as well. Obviously, Dog Cup is coming up in the coming month, and you're going to run that competition again. Is competition a huge thing, and should be people be getting after that sort of stuff? Because we're like, oh, everyone get along and stuff. It's like, no, we need to win. And you talked about high-end warfighting. Get after it, yeah. Yeah,
100%. Competition is the key, and it builds that warrior culture. We can talk about that in a little bit more detail, but we've always had competition. It's something that has never left, especially the battalions in my 3 decades of soldiering. And 1RAR is no different. They're extremely competent. They have that mentality, that warfighting culture, that competition, and it can be just little things. So, for example, the new combatives program and conditioning program where everyone lifts weights. Well, everyone tries to outdo each other. It's a competition just at PT.
Yeah.
Okay.
You start the day with a vicious competition of how much you can deadlift, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, essentially. Yeah. And then it spills over into battle PT, and the companies would invite me and the CO for battle PT, and we get flogged, and then that'd escalate.
It gets harder as you go on.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And it's great fun, but it is competition. And then sports. We tried to bring back that bit of a sport culture on a Thursday afternoon where we would challenge other units in the brigade to whatever they wanted to play, just to get that competition and camaraderie.
You pick the game, we'll beat you at it. Yeah.
Essentially trying to.
Yeah.
So there's always been that competition, and I think that competition builds the warrior culture. And it sets a tone. If everyone is competitive and wants to get after things, it just drags everyone along with them.
So I suppose that's competition and trying to get after. You talked about warrior culture a couple of times now, though, and obviously it's a big theme, and people avoid it because they don't want to be seen as like barbaric or like using brute force to achieve things and just being unrestrained. That's not what you're talking about, though, right?
No.
Like warrior culture, what does it mean to you, I suppose? What is a warrior in terms of in the army context, and sort of what does it look like?
Well, it's just a complete professional soldier as far as I'm concerned. So competitive, professional, they know the task ahead of them and they do that task. They do it with some humility. The Neo, perfect example. There was no heavy-handedness. There was nothing like that. We did the job. We did the task to the professional standard that was required, that reflects greatly on the unit and the ADF. You know what I mean? So you can have a warrior culture where you can go out there and do near peer exercises, go through, do assaults, do clearances, do that high-end warfighting, but you still have that humility to do a professional task, apply by the rules of engagement, etc., etc. And it's all about building that professional culture mixed in with that warrior culture.
Yeah, getting after it in competition, but showing constraint when you need to, and understanding the bigger picture and the commanders 1 up and 2 up. If you talk about failure in that sense, so you're going to try and get after it. You're going to compete. We need you to be the best that you can be and be professional, but also show constraint and hit hard when you need to, and absolutely bang in high in warfighting. But then also be tasked with anything, and nothing is beneath you. Which you talked about humility. If we talk about failure, sort of how did you look at that? Your target rank at 1RAR was section commander, because I suppose you got the most leverage out of that rank band. But then subsequently, they're the commanders on the ground with sections, small teams, absolutely loving it. How did you go about failure and allowing them to fail, or how did you go about talking about failure in the regiment and then subsequently in your postings since?
Yeah, it's a good one. So we try and put a lot of emphasis on the junior NCOs because it's a tough rank, corporal, and it's the only time that a junior NCO will actually be a commander in his own right. So we put a lot of emphasis on the section commanders. So we build section competitions, and we do things like that to make that section as best as they can, because the strong sections build strong platoons, strong combat teams, and that makes the battalion. And I think I was blessed to have fantastic CSMs and seniors, but the junior NCOs really set the tone of the battalion. That's where the drive comes from, and that's what we reinforced. So even we would have a junior NCO hour, monthly, depending on our tasks and our battle rhythm. And the junior NCOs, they would just come in there with me and the CO, and it's just open discussions. What's working, what isn't working, what needs changing, and we would get after it. But what I did do for the junior NCOs is, you are in charge of the soldiers. You are in charge of discipline. So set some guidelines, set the parameters, and we will ruthlessly enforce them. You will do it, but we will set you up for success. So I don't need to be walking around the battalion chipping people for patches, uniforms, etc., etc. The junior NCOs said they'd get after it. They wanted to get after it. We gave them parameters to get after it, and that's exactly what they did.
Yeah, that's because you talked about So full circle, Corporal Andrew Nasida, he was on for Recon by Fire. It's another episode. We talked about ground recon, close target reconnaissance, and then observation posts and stuff as well. But you talked about promoting him to Lance Jack and then subsequently seeing him years later. So how rewarding is that development in the junior NCO level? Noting he's been on and did an episode. It was absolutely phenomenal. Did incredibly. Thousands of people listened to it listened to it. But how rewarding is it to watch junior NCOs grow?
Yeah, it's hugely rewarding. Just yesterday, I was chatting to now Warrant Officer Joyce. Now, he was a private soldier in 5R when I was a CSM. I promoted him to Lance Corporal, promoted him to Corporal. He had done a dog cup as a digger. He then promoted to Sergeant and came back to the school, and then I subsequently promoted him from Sergeant to WO2. So to see him go from private to WO2, and he's now appointed as a CSM at Depot Company, it's hugely rewarding to see professional soldiers getting after it, going through the ranks and doing great things. Nasida, a perfect example. He was private, about to go on IPE, I think in 2022. He was a section commander for the Dog Cup in 24. So kudos to him for going through those ranks. Not just going through the ranks, it takes an unbelievably good corporal to be selected from a battalion to be their representative for the Duke of Gloucester Cup. It's a huge honour, win, lose or draw. Josh Munro is another example. A young corporal in 1RAR, got him to come to the School of Infantry, promoted to sergeant. Now he's the recon platoon sergeant at a point in time. So it is massively rewarding to see excellent soldiers progress and in their own right have a great career.
If we talk about that development, seeing your junior NCOs thrive and get to warrant officer in one circumstance, or recon patrol commanders, recon sergeants and the like, and to see them, I suppose with that development over the years, you've seen some failure, them sort of not achieving the right things at certain times and making failure, but learning from that. I suppose if we talk about sort of learning from failure and reviews and AARs and sort of stuff, what is your approach to learning from failures? Or,
Yep.
There's only two states of being, winning or learning. They did a bit more learning at that point.
Yep.
Sort of how do you go about learning?
Yeah, it's a great question. I guess the analogy is like the black box in aircraft. So airline safety is the highest pretty much in the world. It's very rare for an aeroplane to ever crash or have significant fatalities, and that's worldwide. And the reason for that is every time there's a minor incident through to a catastrophic failure, they look at the black box, they do the recording, they do a complete AAR, and they find what worked, what didn't work, and then they push it out so everyone learns from it. And I think we need to do pretty much the same with our AARs. And be pretty constructive and put it towards something, not just a bit of paper that says we didn't do that well here. We need to then design a training program to get after it. And additionally, though, Jo Lukens, who works with the Cowboys in North Queensland, and she's done a little bit with 1RAR. Success leaves crumbs. So what did you do well? And then build on the things that you did well. Also to sort of leave on that high, because when we do tasks, we really do probably do some fantastic work, which is sort of like cut away sometimes. But I think, like I said, success leaves crumbs. So if you do something well, keep doing it.
I think that's a common thread throughout the episodes. You emphasise the positives. You emphasise people's strengths rather than dwelling on weaknesses. I don't know whether that's deliberate or not, but it's what's come out from the episode is that focus of being like, yeah, you can focus on all the weaknesses all you want and be completely negative and pessimistic about your performance, but like, why not work on the things that you do really well and enhance that sort of thing? So if we talk about that, so we're winning, so that's the development component and lessons learnt and being sort of ruthless, but like, talking about failures, but also emphasising the positives and high performance. If we shift focus to standing out, okay, so there's a natural tendency. I think the US is a little bit different. You can be very proud of being in the uniform and like overtly proud, right? We take a more subdued approach to that, but also there is a constant struggle. We talked about being a section member or then getting promoted to Lance Jack to be seen to be thriving and trying to put yourself out there and thrust, I suppose. you've experienced 32 years of, thrusters or, trying to strike that balance between, being a thruster or versus being really good at your job. What's your sort of take on, tall poppy and smashing people down for achieving amazing things, and sort of how does that work in a battalion?
I like to think of it as I use fear of failure as a great motivator, and some people say, "Oh, that's not so mentally healthy." And I don't mean that I live in fear of failing, but I think having a healthy fear of failure motivates you to be better. So it's not about thrusting or trying to one-up people. It's doing the best job that you can possibly do. So that fear of failure, it's the fear of failure of letting yourself down, command down, your subordinates down, and the soldiers around you. You want to do the best job that you can possibly do, regardless of rank, all the time. Okay, and so you don't want to let yourself down. And it is a great motivator. The great Richie McCaw, All Blacks Rugby World Cup winning captain, he uses it as a great motivator himself. He has the weight of a nation on his shoulders, and he uses that to be the pinnacle in rugby. And I think we can use a little bit of that fear of failure to excel ourselves. Like, I've been in training command now for probably 15 to 20 years, School of Armour, School of Infantry in the UK. I couldn't think of anything worse than having to stand up and deliver a lesson that I knew nothing about. If I'm going to deliver a lesson, I need to be the SME on it. So that's that fear of failure, but that's just professionalism and doing your job. It's not thrusting. It's not after awards or anything like that. We spoke about it a little bit yesterday. Commendations and medals are fantastic. I received a gold commendation at the School of Infantry, and it was after 25 years of service. But there's great ways to be rewarded in the system, in the army, without certificates and commendations and medals, etc., etc. It's doing a great job. It's competing in Dog Cup. It's getting postings. It's getting opportunities to show that you are professional. And even I draw down onto even my kids now. Performance punishment. That's not a bad thing. It means that you're Mr. Reliable.
Yep.
People know that if they task you with a job, that it'll be done, to the best of your ability, which is probably exceeds what their expectations are. So think of that as a good thing and not a negative.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely awesome point. I think that it would be remiss of me, and we only have a few minutes left, but it would be remiss of me not to talk about death iconology and symbology and the removal of that. I know you served at 5RAR in Delta Company as a CSM.
Yep.
And your what was your I know your icon was quite controversial and stuff, and then subsequently you saw the change. You're asking us to be high-end warfighters and absolutely get after these huge things and be aggressive when we need to, and kill, basically, because that's why we exist. If not for preparing for wars and winning wars, why do we exist?
Yep.
But then vice versa, you've seen that motif be removed from Delta Company. Can you just talk about your take on symbology, death icons and the like, and that removal from the army? Yeah,
so we inherited the Reaper. So the Reaper was on every bit of clothing, hat, rugby jumper that Delta Company 5RA at the time had. And then when it was removed, it didn't change the attitude of the soldiers. It was policy driven, and being professional soldiers, we had a great esprit de corps. We had just taken over the Ready Combat Team from 3 Brigade, which had never been done before in my time in the army, and so. We had about 74 IATs over the 2 years come into Delta Company to bolster us. And we had fantastic morale. We had done MSTs and MREs down in Coltana, and we were at the top of our game. And so when the decision was made to lose the iconology, it was like all of a sudden our morale didn't drop. Our standards didn't drop. The company was still the company, was still the Ready Combat Team, and was still professional enough just to get after the tasks that were put ahead.
Yeah.
So I don't think that iconology and removing it changed our warrior mindset. And I do agree with removing some of those iconologies. And it's not a lot of it isn't even based on history. If you look at the British Army, like their patches and their unit naming, etc., is it's centuries old. No British soldier would ever contemplate changing a patch or anything like that in the British Army, because that is history. And maybe that's something we could lean back on as our short history and utilising some of that iconology for the better.
Yeah. That's also, so I think we've mammoth task, define what a soldier needs to be and a rifleman needs to look like in 2025 and beyond. We talked about the NEO case study. We've talked about readiness. We talked about purpose and why we exist, competition and being ruthless, and then, but also showing constraint with humility. If we come back to that key takeaway about how to build strong teams and resilient teams, wrapping up 32 years of service, trying to push that down to junior NCOs and junior officers, how do you think we build strong teams and we should go after winning high-end warfighting?
Yeah, it takes extremely hard work. So you have to have that ethos of not just hard work. You need to get your hands dirty, extremely dirty, and we use the acronym, you need to be filthy.
Yeah.
And so that acronym, getting your hands dirty, hard work, filthy, I'll just quickly touch on that, and it's something that you can utilise in every aspect of your life. So the F is forget what people think of you, tell you what you can and can't do. It's your life, so you need to get after the things that you want to do. Don't believe that been told that you can't be a special forces soldier. And you can't transfer. You want to do another trade. You want to ASWOC. Whatever it is that you want to get after, do it.
Yeah.
Strive for that. So that's the F. The I, you need to be intrinsically motivated. This isn't a profession where you're going to get fame.
Yeah, you talked about that before. Yeah.
You're not going to be excessively rich. You know what I mean? They're extrinsically motivated scenarios. It needs to be intrinsically. It needs to come from within. You need to believe in your service. You need to believe in what you're doing. That you'll make things better for not just yourself, your family, but the community and the community abroad. Even though 20 plus years in Afghanistan, and I was there for those multiple rotations, we did the best we could in the time frame that we're there for to make those people's lives better. So you need to be motivated from within. The L, little gains. You can't get after everything all the time, all at once. And it's just called compounding gains. So if you try to improve something just 1% every week, you know what I mean? You're going to be 50% better off at the end of the year. So it doesn't matter whether it's in the gym, your communication, your skill levels in whatever aspect it is of soldiering, just little increments. Keep doing that, and over that years, okay, you'll get to the professionalism and the professional soldier that you want to be. So just little increments, little gains over a long period of time. T, it's tough. Being an infantry soldier for 3 decades, it's tough on the mind, the body. A great saying is, everyone wants the view, but they don't want the climb. Well, you need to do the climb to get the view. So you have to work extremely hard, and you have to be tough physically and mentally. And I think in our line of work, being physically tough is probably the key. I think if you can, if your body can just break through barriers, your mind will follow. I know some people probably say the other way around, but for me, being physically strong and being able to push myself allows me to think more clearly and be a better soldier. So stay fit physically and mentally. H, habits. We've probably all read Atomic Habits, and there's a lot of documents out there about these little habits, but it's 100% true. But you need to have habits that you don't even think about. It's why we do drill. It's why we do TROTs with weapons. You don't have to think about it. It's just a habit. It's like getting up, shave, uniform, PT. They're just little habits that you don't think about, but just have those habits ready to go, pushing you and forcing you down the path of that professionalism, that service, and the better you sort of become in your trade, whatever skill that you have, it's far more enjoyable. You know, you're not struggling and straining 24/7. It just comes naturally. So build those habits around your lifestyle, your workplace, and your mindset. So those small habits. And the last part is the why is you. Only you can do it. No one will do it for you.
Yeah.
So
I think people waiting for others to do it, and there's expectation. Oh, they owe me this, or the organisation should be doing this for me. It's like, no, you need to get after it. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Ultimately, it's your life. You need to put in what you want to get out. And like I said, people potentially want what you have, but aren't willing to go through the barriers that it took you to get there. You know what I mean? Everyone wants the view. They don't necessarily want to do the climb. But that is solely on you.
Yeah. That's awesome. So you must be not just dirty, get your hands dirty, but absolutely filthy.
100%.
I should have mentioned this at the start, but we're recording from the Australian Army Infantry Museum. Absolutely awesome set. This is the best set I've ever recorded on by far at Singleton. With a couple of a chopper and APC in the background to directly link your Timor sort of analogy there, or story, sorry. Absolutely awesome set. That's an amazing sort of takeaway. I think we just kept riffing, and it's been a long episode, which is absolutely awesome because there's so much gold in there. Thank you so much for coming on, Warrant Officer Scott Krum. It's been absolutely awesome. And congratulations on the Order of Australia medal. You'll fly down to Sydney now, packed schedule. You'll fly to Sydney for the investiture. Thank you so much for coming on. You have an amazing reputation in the Corps, and to everyone I threw out there to suss you as a guest, all had raving reviews. So thank you so much for coming on and telling sort of the junior NCOs and junior officers about 32 years of service.
Cheers. Thanks very much, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Cove Podcast. Explore our channel for more great audio PME content. Also, visit us at cove.army.gov.au for hundreds of additional resources. The Cove, the learning home of the Australian profession of arms.